This is Cicero's Republic, the French translation, which I have finished reading, I'd say about an hour ago. And here are my first impressions and why you might want to read it, which I do recommend. If you're interested in philosophy, antiquity, political philosophy, certainly, this is actually very interesting and enjoyable, and even enlightening, if you like, in a general sense, not in a Buddha walking on clouds sense, but. There's a lot of very worthy content here and very relevant stuff to what's going on right now in the world. So this, as you might surmise from the title, on Republic, a book which, at least in this edition, is published conjointly with The Laws. I think there's also an Oxford like in this collection, Oxford World Classics edition, and I did not check, but I wouldn't be surprised if they also published these two works together, Republic and Laws. Well, as you might surmise, as I said, from the title, this is very much a response and companion piece to Plato's two political works of the same title, so Republic and Laws, and to coin an expression, like a phrase, I, for one, did not care for the Republic. So me, personally. I thought it was obviously beautiful and full of, wonderful imagery, the legendary allegory of the cave and so forth. But I thought... I have a lot of issues with Plato's Republic, a lot of them, which we will address maybe in another video. But this one I liked a lot better, actually. I thought it was more directly applicable to our own interests. And again, I'm not saying that Plato's Republic obviously has no qualities, but I think usually most of the time, the people who talk about it haven't read it. The impression I get, and even those who do, they kind of project what they want the book to be, instead of kind of dealing with what's actually there, with its faults and qualities. Anyway, there's a lot less of that here. And what's the core? I will start with the core takeaway, and then some general notes which I took as I was reading it. Well, first of all, this is a fragmentary book. We only have, bits and pieces of it, a lot of bits and pieces. Many of the chapters or books, like this is in 6 books. So a lot of the books are not complete, but mainly complete. Okay, but still, it's filled through and through with lacunae and fragments that they didn't know where to put. There's a lot of them, so. It is sometimes a bit hard to be completely certain what position Cicero is actually putting forth. Like, what did he actually believe? Because it's a dialogue, as many of these works for antiquity are, and so his different characters. Some of them might put forth a position that the other disagrees with, but we only have the fragment where one position is presented and not the rebuttal, which might be closer to Cicero's point of view. That sort of deal does happen in the treatise. But generally speaking, the main takeaway here is that Cicero is not at all the man I imagined he was. So I consider myself a decently well-read person. It's just decently, okay? But, I have a lot of Cicero books on my shelf, a lot of them. But I've never read them. And I didn't read them because I saw Cicero as someone who didn't seem so interesting, to be honest. Like, obviously, he's well known for being a great orator, so he's like essentially the master orator of everyone who came after him. Everyone studies Cicero's speeches, and he wrote many treatises on eloquence and stuff like that. But I didn't know until recently that the main reason he wrote those books is because he believed, well, two things really. One of them was that like his main love in life, besides the Roman Republic, his main love was philosophy. And he's usually considered a Stoic, but it's more, as I learned reading this, he's a bit more eclectic than that anyway. So again, topic for another day, but he's not just a Stoic. And there's some dialogue with Aristotle as well in this work. More Plato, but still. Anyway, but the core thing is that he loved philosophy, and his oratory work was meant to help people become better philosophers, and write better philosophy. And if you're reading Plotinus, for instance, which I am right now, you appreciate that it matters being able to write well, which Plotinus isn't. He's really a brilliant thinker, but it's hard to understand just because of the total absence of any attempt at writing even decently well. In Plotinus, it's just he's writing words as they come. But so Cicero was the opposite of that. So he wanted to be able to express deep philosophical ideas in a elegant, eloquent, efficient manner. But that love of rhetoric in the purest, most noble sense, and that aspiration to good expression, like to talk well and to write well, that was also driven by a deep commitment to service, like to public service, again in the purest, noblest sense. And to his love of the Roman Republic as a republic. And what really transpires when you read the Republic is that this is a guy who really loved, Rome as what we today would call a democracy. Okay, so this regime that had been built, and his relationship with the political regime of Rome is deeper than what I'm saying, because he's actually describing, hence the title Republic, he's using Rome as an example of the best city that ever existed. But he's not doing as opposed to, Plato, who has Socrates elaborate a kind of utopia, right? A hypothetical utopia. So Cicero, being a good Roman, so very practical, he uses Rome as an example of the perfect city, which is a trick you see a lot of philosophers try to pull off over the millennia, right? It always just so happens that the city they live in is always the ideal city of, the best city of history, like Hegel, I think, did something like that. But usually when I read something like that, I kind of roll my eyes. But he has good reason. Actually, he puts forth his reason, which is basically, well, we built this great city and we had a republic for 500 years. Again, a regime of the people, by the people, with a lot of nuance, and obviously they had slaves, but the general idea of having a relationship to the state that one finds in, thinkers and politicians from the United States, for instance, who were writing about the United States when it was possible to be idealistic about it, and who talk about the Great Republic of the United States, of the USA, in a very, enthralled, loving, admiring way. So that sort of relationship to the state, well, that's what he has with Rome. And, I'm not an expert by any means on the Republic era of Rome, but what is certain here is that even though he might have blind spots, and again, we might argue with our mores today about his, he doesn't say anything bad about slavery again, but I'm saying this because we are so cynical and we want to criticize people from other times, and but what's really, really, really striking, which I didn't expect at all, is really just how really deeply sincere Cicero is in his love of the Roman Republic, B, his commitment to the nobler and higher ideals of the Republic, such as, justice and equity and stuff like that. And 3, Cicero gave his life for the Republic. He's writing this literally in the last years, like 2-3 years of the Roman Republic. Okay, as he's writing this, I believe that Caesar has already not only risen to the throne, but he's been killed. He's been stabbed. Right? The Ides of March have passed, and he was an opponent of Caesar because he considered Caesar to be a dictator, which he kind of was. But now he's living in the era of Mark Antony. Cicero considers that Mark Antony is shaping up to be a dictator himself, and he wrote a couple of very famous works. I think the Philippics, I think they're called, which I haven't read, where he criticized Mark Antony, and in the name of the Republic and in opposition to tyranny. And Mark Antony had Cicero killed. He had him assassinated because Cicero was criticizing the would-be dictator. So yeah, Cicero gave his life for the Republic, and he gave his life knowing that what he was doing was extremely dangerous. Like, he was taking a public stance on a very, very powerful man who, had essentially, if not acquired dictatorial powers, was pretty close to having them, right? So essentially, like, he was, it's like taking a stand against Mussolini just, 6 months before he takes power, something like that. This is a guy who really walked the walk, and, he was willing to put his life, in danger for the principles of the Republic, who he loved and who he thought was noble. And his case for the nobility, again in the best sense of Rome, it's quite eloquent. I mean, last thing I will say for now is that if you read, what's one of the things that's very surprising about this is that the values are recognizable. Like when he's talking about, justice and the difference between like natural justice, like real justice, and, legal justice or social justice in that sense, like the socially mandated version of justice, like the courts of law and so forth. So, yeah, first of all, a lot of the concepts he explains, he uses terms which I'm guessing we took directly from him because they're pretty much the same ones we use. I believe, if I read the introduction correctly, that Augustine took a lot of concepts from him, and Augustine was massively influential in the West. He mentions, just war. When is a war just? So, which is either when you're about to be invaded or somebody directly, fail to show you respect, but not in a bully way. Like if somebody essentially gives you the finger publicly, a head of state says, you're all sheep and dogs and lackeys, you don't deserve, so if some leader lacks, respect, shows you contempt in public, something like that, I think he gives that as a good, valid reason for a just war. And in the context, it makes sense, actually. Where I was going at with this is that his not only the concepts he's mentioning are recognizable, but his idea of what is just is pretty much what most people's idea today of justice would be. Like if you read Socrates, not Socrates, but Plato, the morality really of the Republic and the laws are insane. Actually, it's like a theocracy, really, and people are assigned places because of their quote-unquote race, but in a kind of reincarnation type of way, and the soul, and it's all based on Plato's doctrine of the ideas, and it's crazy. And it's horrible, and everything is based on the death penalty, really, like on Republican laws. It's all exile and death, and the rules are not only strict, but they're based on non-rational principles. Okay, nothing we would recognize as reason, I would say, sadly. But Cicero, none of that. Cicero is a noble man, but and in some ways a simple man. Again, not in a pejorative sense, but he's a decent person who you can recognize as decent, who has feelings which are very comparable to those we might have today, as I mentioned. And again, he believed in this regime because he did believe really that it was based on not only on higher moral values or ethical values, but ethical values that we can again directly recognize and appreciate today. And my final takeaway from the book, and I have other notes, but for now it would be that, is you read this really, and it's one of those instances, and I have had quite a few of them recently reading these older books, like books from antiquity. One of those instances where you kind of read that and you realize just how corrupt our civilization is. Okay, and this society that most countries in the West, we all have our own, like different countries and different territories have different regimes, but they're usually in the West based on variations on what we call democracy. But you can kind of tell that just because we call it that doesn't really mean that's what it is, and perhaps it was an attempt at real democracy, like in the 19th century, for instance. And I believe it was. Okay, topic for another day. But I think the good faith answer to did Western countries attempt to put in place real, somewhat Republican regimes for relatively noble reasons. I mean, I think there was a lot of cynicism and a lot of exploitation built in the thing, but there's, in my opinion, my observation is that no, there's too much deeply held respect for the ideals of democracy in normal people, okay, for it to be completely ideological, okay. But the fact is that you can tell right away that we're not in a healthy democracy or republic when you read these books, because even though Cicero was writing at the death of the Roman Republic, he still came from a culture that had lived a form of at least semi-healthy republic, which I don't think any of us living on Earth right now ever lived, really. Certainly not in the last few decades. Like, what we have is oligarchy. That's what we have. That word gets bandied around a lot, but and usually, for ideological reasons or to make an effect. But I think if you really take the time to sit down and look at the regime and what it's actually doing on a day-to-day, situation, like if you make an actual study of the actual regime that the West has been living in, again, for many decades, we are in an oligarchy. Okay, this is not a republic. Okay, and I don't think the Eastern countries or Russia or I don't think any country is really ethically much superior today. Okay, I don't think it's the we're bad and other people are good situation, but the fact is that if we want to understand the problems we have right now and why we find it so hard to extricate ourselves from it, I think reading something like Plato's, not Plato, but Cicero's Republic is very useful, because precisely, first of all, he's a clear thinker. He's a smart guy, but he's not highly theoretical at all. In fact, so it's pretty easy to read, actually. And he puts forth interesting arguments on what is a healthy republic and a healthy regime. And I'm not saying we should copy Rome, but I am saying we should emulate Cicero's commitment to the higher values that he believes Rome, incarnated, if you like, because those values he puts forth, which he believed that Rome represented, those, I think, are the values of most of us, left or right, most of us on Earth right now. And I think we should also emulate, the commitment to speak truth, even if it is inconvenient. So, good book, Cicero's Republic, short as well, something like 80, 100 pages, something like that. Very interesting, very worthwhile. So check it out. Take care, see you soon, live long and prosper, and keep reading those books. Bye.